Can I just have a sort of clear understanding about what your view is with respect to foreign influence over our elections? I mean, it could be a very clear stance that there should be no foreign influence over our electoral process. If that's so, then that would be good to have that clarity. But whereas some of your paragraphs suggest that provided it doesn't meet a certain test of harm, that if it doesn't meet some maliciousness, that it's okay for foreign interference to play a part in our electoral process. And I'm not sure that that is actually your position. Perhaps you can clarify for us.
No, I think my position is that voters during an election period should know that they are consuming material that's come from a foreign source, and there should be no compromise about that. They should be informed about what they're reading, and if we're talking about an adversary that's trying to stir the pot, then that communication will be necessarily covert. Then the question is, why is it that I did not suggest a clear takedown if the material is from a foreign source? I think how curious, right? You must be wondering. So is that possible or not? I think it's back to Teo Lian's point, and I think that's what I'm trying to achieve as well. It's a balance. So if you take down, it makes it even more attractive to read. People will be looking for it, and in the internet age, that's not entirely foolproof. If you leave it, but you actually put out an advisory and say, excuse me, this is actually generated by a foreign source, still checking which one it is, but the provenance is not local. You are, in not taking it down, but prohibiting further circulation, you're also allowing third parties, you're allowing citizens, those who do care enough, to also engage in that debate and dialogue. So where's the balance? The balance is, as Teo Lian has described, there is the negative liberty, which is you're trying to be very careful about how you regulate speech, especially under the circumstance of the election. But there's the positive liberty, which is you've got to also allow people to decide for themselves in an election.
So Dr. Koh, just specifically, a deliberate online falsehood in an attempt to influence our local electoral process from a foreign entity, is there any reason why that should be allowed to be part of the discourse?
It should be engaged with. It should be taken on. It should be, first we should recognize that it is foreign. Then in the process, first you have to establish the provenance. Then you have to establish the falsehood. And then you have to say, we stop play here and we have to take it on. But
would we not then run the risk of providing further reach and impact and significance to what we know is a deliberate online falsehood from overseas?
And by which time a lot of time would have lapsed anyway. I mean, you saw the evidence. Okay. You know that, there was some purpose in taking you through Dr. Soon's evidence.
Sure.
And also what happened in the United States and elsewhere. So everything you now say seems to be going against the weight of evidence the committee has heard. I mean, what sane or sensible or civilized purpose is there in, say, allowing a statement in Indonesia prior to the elections that President Jokowi and his family are Christian? What purpose do you think is served by that?
Well, there would be others that declare that he is not.
And no,
there would be third parties.
Sorry, Dr. Koh, I'm asking you what purpose is served?
Yes, if it's a fact, yeah.
Well, he's not a Christian.
Right.
So what purpose is served by allowing people to put out that falsehood in order to inflame opinion? Is there any purpose that's served?
That the rest of the right-thinking citizens would disagree with that, and they would not just take.
But why do you believe that? The evidence shows you that a significant number of people could well end up believing it.
But there would be, hopefully, enough people also to push back.
But there is no evidence to that effect.
Of course.
The evidence is to the contrary.
Right. Of course, if we're talking about a straightforward.
But also, we haven't had an answer to my original question, which is, what purpose is served, either in terms of the theory of free speech or the theory of marketplace of ideas, in allowing an absolute and utter falsehood to circulate when you know that it's more likely to be believed, at least by a section of the people, just like a section of the Americans believed that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring, or that she was selling arms to ISIS, or that President Obama was a Muslim. And deliberate falsehoods which targeted President Obama's original 2012 supporters not to vote for Mrs. Clinton. So I'm struggling to understand, what purpose do you think, a few questions, what purpose do you think will be served? Mm-hmm. And second, by reference to, we took you through Dr. Theo Lian's points, mm-hmm. marketplace of ideas. Free speech has got it can be true, it can be opinions, it can be misinterpretations, it can mm-hmm. be absolute falsehood. Speech is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And if that is so, what ends are you achieving by allowing absolute falsehoods targeted at the gut to circulate, to try and influence people, when it actually contradicts the very fundamentals of democracy and corrodes democracy? That's the first question. The second question is, particularly when you know that such speech actually is very difficult to push back against. All the evidence that we have put before you shows that. So maybe you can help the committee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm happy to. Thank you. Well, first off, before I answer the two questions, I think when you frame the question as an absolute clear data point that is completely false,
yes,
then I think that framed that way, there is no purpose in a clear, deliberate falsehood circulating for democracy.
Good. Let me assure
so
you that is what we are dealing with.
Yes.
So let's just stick to that. Deliberate falsehoods, as to whether it is clear or not clear, there's got to be some way of ascertaining
Which
it.
is my point.
Well,
which is what I was coming to, sir,
Yeah.
if you allow me. Yeah.
So
I
we are
think that
agreed on
there
the
is a
first point.
process of establishing sometimes
Right.
Whether there's a half-truth or whatever. It still takes time.
Right.
That's the first point. The second point is that sometimes these are not just data points, but they are also opinion. And therefore,
No, we are not dealing with opinions.
Opinion that is layered onto some
no,
data.
let's be clear. This is where a lot of confusion arises.
Right.
We are not talking about opinions in this committee.
Mm-hmm.
We are dealing with deliberate falsehoods. Opinions can be based on falsehoods. And then there's got to be a way of identifying those falsehoods and dealing with them.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of clarity of discussion,
Yes.
let's not get to opinions. People are entitled to their opinions, how unreasonable they are. We are only dealing with falsehoods.
Yes, but
And
even
when
then, there is a period of time to establish.
Well,
right.
you see, this is where, because you're not a lawyer, you are at a slight disadvantage. There are ways of dealing with that. Leave that to us in terms of, we'll get the experts to work with us on the process. So the question is more a policy one for you. If we can identify, or we can find a way of identifying falsehoods, and we've got to obviously deal with the virality in the digital age and the speed, and those are all process issues, mm-hmm. which we'll have to deal with. So let's not get that mixed up here.
Sure.
As long as you assume that we can deal with those issues in some way, in some acceptable way, then I think we are at item in saying that the deliberate online falsehoods have no place in the kind of discussions we are talking about.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the key point is also that there are citizens who will then need to be convinced in their hearts and minds, firstly, that it's false, and therefore you do want to allow some space for people to make their minds up on that as well. You declare that it is false, but people still will have to discuss and absorb it. Given how difficult it is, we don't want to neglect that process of persuasion and convincing. I say it's false, but I still need to persuade you it's false. These are the different steps. And therefore, all I'm saying is we have to allow for a process where there is that deliberation as well.
No, I want to understand this a little bit more.
Right.
Maybe we can put up the cartoon that we have been showing to the others.
Of course. And Let's have a look.
Yes.
I'm happy to.
This was a cartoon that has been put up, and Twitter refused to take it off. You see a white woman, half naked, being surrounded by obviously Muslim-looking figures. Her child is being murdered by one of them. The word diversity is put up. Do you honestly believe that we should allow circulation of this? And as you say, we should go and fight for the hearts and minds of people, but after allowing this to circulate?
No, I think this is one example where it's clear-cut.
So this is where I think we are running into definitional problems. By the way, Twitter thought that this was not clear-cut. It didn't offend their policies. In Singapore, it will.
Yes.
And I think as a sensible person, you will agree it will.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Would you agree that a suggestion that President Obama is a Muslim is a clear-cut example?
Yes.
Right. Would you agree that the suggestion that Mrs. Clinton is selling arms to ISIS is a clear-cut example?
Yes.
Would you
Yes.
agree that the suggestion that Mrs. Clinton is running a pedophile ring out of a pizza restaurant is such an absurd suggestion that it's a clear-cut example as well?
She will have to prove it. She will have to set it out
so
clearly.
you will
It will
allow
take time.
that to circulate?
And she will have to engage with that.
Right.
Yes.
So I think
But you
where
can
we
see
are-
in my examples in the submissions, for instance.
No, sorry, let
Are
me
you saying
finish.
that?
Let me finish.
Okay.
So I think I understand where you're coming from. In your mind, there are some examples which are clear-cut, where we don't need to engage. It just has got to be taken down.
Yes.
And this is one such example. The ISIS example is another. President Jokowi being Christian is another. And you can imagine there are many such examples.
Yes.
But you have some questions as to where that line is drawn. But I think in your earlier evidence, you are quite good enough to agree that it can be drawn in terms of clear factual falsehoods.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
I think that's good enough. Thank you.
Thank you.